Hello, everyone, and welcome on behalf of the Institute. I'm Nils Lewis. You've probably seen me around occasionally. I am the program manager here, and I'm really pleased to be introducing Dr. Louise McHugh tonight. I'll start by saying a little bit about why we're doing this program. This is National, it's Autism Awareness Month this month. And each of the previous years we have done various talks on autism. Usually, last year we had Evan Eichler, who was focusing on the genes and genetic mutations that contribute to autism spectrum disorder. And at that one we had a lot of people coming up sort of bombarding him, and he pointed out that he's a genetic researcher and doesn't really have much to tell them about the way they go about their lives and how they manage this challenge. I'm really happy to introduce Louise tonight. Louise is going to be talking to us about acceptance and commitment therapy more broadly. It's applicable to autism, and yesterday she was working with parents in the morning and clinicians in the afternoon on ways in which this tool can be applied in those scenarios. Today she'll be giving us more of a broad sense of it. I also want to welcome many colleagues here from the New England Center for Children and the Autism Support Network of Abu Dhabi. It's great to have you. So Louise McHugh holds the post of lecturer at the University College Dublin School of Psychology. Her research interests are centered on the experimental analysis of language and cognition from a behavioral, analytic, and relational frame theory perspective. She focuses on the development of complex cognitive skills such as perspective taking and the process of investigation of behavioral and cognitive psychotherapies, including acceptance and commitment therapy, which she's talking to us about tonight. She has many accomplishments, including she edited the 2012 book, The Self and Perspective Taking, Contributions and Applications from Modern Behavioral Science. She's written 3 book chapters and has published over 60 research papers. And most impressively to me as a millennial, she's also developed an iPad app based on protocols that she'd created to help children with autism see things from another person's perspective, which is a particular challenge for children with autism and people with autism. She holds her PhD from the National University of Ireland, Maynooth, and has received funding from several sources, including the British Academy, the Leverhulme Trust, the Waterloo Trust, and the Welsh Assembly. She was awarded the European Marie Curie Career Integration Award to join the faculty at UCD, and we are pleased to have her here to speak tonight on acceptance and commitment therapy as a broad tool. Please welcome Dr. Louise McHugh.
So I'm really excited to be here in this beautiful country to talk about something that is an area that I've been conducting research in for the last 15 years. And during that time, the empirical base to show that this is really something that can help with human well-being for all of us has really grown exponentially. So I'm talking to you today about something that's important, not just for parents of children with autism or many clinical groups, but really for all of us as human beings. One thing that we like to do as humans is to avoid certain experiences. So there are feelings and thoughts that we really just don't like the idea of having. So things like embarrassment or anxiety or jealousy are kind of emotions that we think we should not have those. And our common response when they show up is to try to squash or push them away. And this is also true for thoughts that are negative. We really feel that the important thing to do when we have negative thoughts is somehow to not think about them. And what we know is that 80% of people, if asked, what will you do if you have a thought that you don't want? A thought like, I'm not smart enough, or I can't do this. And 80% of people say that they will try to distract themselves from it. Like, that's the most common strategy that we will try. So, I just won't think about it. And what we know is that Daniel Wegner, over a number of years, was very interested in this idea of thought suppression and whether it could work. And he, across a number of experiments, asked people to not think about white bears. That was the thought that he decided he'd go for. And if we just look at that even now here, imagine if you're instructed not to think about white bears. Just don't think about fluffy white bears at all. It's when we in that sense, it's kind of funny because we can see, actually, that's so hard to do. To try not to think about something is actually quite difficult. Yet, it's a strategy that we think seems so meaningful to apply when it's a thought we don't want. And more interestingly, what Wegner has shown repeatedly is that when people are asked for 5 minutes to not think about a white bear, so a suppression phase, in the following 5 minutes afterwards, they will have an inflated rebound amount of thoughts of white bears. And this is highly inflated compared to people who in the initial 5 minutes were asked just concentrate on white bear. So actually concentrating on it didn't have a rebound, but if I try not to think about it, I start to have this inflated amount of thoughts about the very thing that I'm trying not to think about. So there's this sort of ironic process that occurs in this very common strategy of trying not to think about things. And this is not only true of thoughts, but also of feelings. So what we know is that people who are going through the bereavement phase and the loss of a loved one, if they try to avoid the grief and not think about it, that they will end up in the bereavement phase for longer. So what we know is that this message is very common, that we should somehow be able to distract or get rid of emotions and thoughts, is actually a misnomer or a mistake. And so acceptance and commitment therapy is trying to, or has techniques and technologies from behavioral science to be able to help people to be able to get back in contact with their experience as it is, and to stop seeing our thoughts and our feelings as things to be avoided or threatening, and rather to now direct people towards having lives that are about things they value and matter, not about trying to somehow change my internal world. That's what we're going to be looking at today. Just to give some context, a book that's just currently in press has the ACT research journey has just about to come out. That's looking at, just summarizing all of the ACT research that's now becoming, increasing amounts. So there's now 100 randomized control trials showing that acceptance and commitment training or therapy, depending on the context in which it's done, benefits people, enhances their quality of life. It has many well-being advantages to be part of this treatment package. So here what we can see is this exponential growth in the number of studies across time. So it's getting more and more of an empirical base, which to me as a scientist is very important. We want to make sure that the treatments that people are getting as a psychologist and a scientist are empirically validated. Also, in this review of the literature, what's coming out is that this work is done across a number of domains. So from pain to working with parents, to working with those with epilepsy, to working with those with substance abuse. Transdiagnostically, helping people to recontact their experience, their current experience, really has positive outcomes for them in terms of their well-being across a number of domains. And also just to point to the fact that this research and these trials have been done across a number of different countries in the world. So we're seeing that there is a common humanity in the fact that we all tend to try to not have certain thoughts and feelings. There's something common in what we do around that. Okay. So Stephen Hayes, here's a quote from Stephen Hayes that said, the single most remarkable fact about humans is how hard it is for them to be happy. We have got, we as a species have got, you know, in many instances and cases, can have copious amounts of money. We can be living and have shelter. We can have all we need and still suffer and be unhappy. We, unlike other species, have something that can make us unhappy even when our basic needs are met. And when I was in the workshop with the parents, I used this example, and someone mentioned this was probably not an example that is applicable here, because I used an example of the rain, but I'm from Ireland, so so the example was that, you know, if you left your dog outside all night, and he was used to being an in-house dog, and it was pouring rain and it was stormy out, as soon as you let him in the morning, and he was back in the cozy house with food, he'd be content. If you locked your partner out of the house in the rain on purpose and let them in the next morning, it doesn't matter how warm and cozy they were or how much food they had, they'd have a lot to say about that. And they would, you know, bring that back up, right? That's going to be a conversation. And they're going to come up with lots of reasons why you might have done that, etc. So there's this thing that we humans seem to have, that can allow us to be dislocated, actually, from our current experience. And as we'll see as we go along, this ability that we have to think, which is the greatest gift that humans have in many ways, is also the very thing that can bring us away from the present moment. It's a thing that can allow me to be here and now, and yet thinking and worrying about a future event that might not even ever happen. It's the thing that can allow me to be ruminating about a past event that made me sad, or even a past trauma in severe cases. Here, even though here and now I'm entirely safe. Language and thought allows us to not be present. You know, we've all been in that conversation where halfway through we realized, I did not hear a word that person just said. You know, our thoughts can drag us away from the current context. So with this model, and as we behavioral scientists look at sort of normal human processes, sort of realizing maybe over the last 15 to 20 years that the assumption of healthy normality is problematic. So the field of psychology would look at maladaptive behavior in terms of being abnormal. Maybe, you know, over time this is changing. So there's a manual of disorders called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and this manual, this manual will show symptom lists of different disorders and descriptions of different disorders. This list can become problematic, and this symptom list can become problematic because at times it's missing what's actually maintaining the problem behavior. The DSM-5, which has now just come out, in America, 80% of the children could be diagnosed with a disorder. You know, we only know the stats for them. But, you know, how ludicrous, and what are the other 20% doing? But, you know, how ludicrous if we can we really say it's abnormal if 80% of people could meet criteria, right? There's so many now disorders. We're just collecting and creating and putting down more and more disorders. But humans, there is a ubiquity of human suffering. And now as psychology moves forward, we're seeing more and more that actually very normal human processes that we all have a destructive quality to them if we don't learn how to be able to interact with them in useful ways. So really what we want is a science and a science of human behavior that allows us to understand thinking and language and what these things are in a way that we can understand more effectively why it is that we try to avoid certain negative thoughts and why it is trying to do that doesn't work. Okay. So this destructive process that we have is this very thing that is the gift, which is that we have language, also has it's a double-edged sword. Thinking in language, this ability also can create a lot of suffering for us. It can enable more pain in these kind of ways. As I said, it can mean that we're not living in the present moment. It can mean we're reliving a painful past, or we're concerned about a future event. It can contribute to us evaluating ourselves in ways. Other species can evaluate themselves. But we constantly are engaging in a game of self-thought and evaluation. When neuroscientists started looking at using EEG and fMRI equipment to look inside the activity, neurological activity, they initially, when they had participants who were doing experiments, and when they were off task, not doing an experiment, they saw that the same areas of the brain always lit up. And they called this at the time the default network, because they assumed that was non-activity. You're not engaging in a task. But across time and experimentation, what they realized is that when they're not engaging in the task, they're thinking about themselves, their self. They're evaluating and thinking about their self. So we, with language and thought, are constantly evaluating and thinking about, categorizing who we are. Are we enough? Is what we did right? Etc. And because we have language, we can also compare ourselves to others. And social comparison is not the only way. It's not just others. But because we have language, we can actually create an ideal self that we're not living up to in our mind and feel bad about not living up to that. Me as being the perfect parent. I'm not living up to my ideal of what that would be. So language can really catch us in tricky ways. So in a sense, we sort of evolved, developed language because we're a cooperative species. So we developed language to be able to cooperate effectively and to avoid external threats, not get eaten by the lion in the savannah, whatever. But now, we're no longer under that threat. But we've over-applied this strategy to using language and problem solving to external threats to ourselves. So we now try to solve ourselves as a problem, like as if our thoughts and our feelings, somehow we need to be able to solve the problem or get rid of them or make them always happy. And there's that sort of very prevalent message, like, don't worry, be happy. Like as if the goal is to always feel this one emotion, which is happiness. But the problem with that is that there is a range of emotions. And happiness is just one. And we in our lifetime, all of us, will feel all emotions. Because that's what being human is. Being human means experiencing different emotions. So when the message is that it's important to deny my current feeling if it's not happiness, then what I'm doing is dislocating myself from my experience in the present. And in a sense, I'm taking myself away from the only thing I have, which is my current experience. So I'm using up all my cognitive energy to somehow try to get away from my experience. Okay. So what we see is that a big problem that arises as a byproduct of this is that we become experientially avoidant. We try to avoid our experiences. And here's a definition of what experiential avoidance is. It's the tendency to attempt to alter the form, frequency, or our sensitivity to historically produced negative private events. So avoiding experiences such as sensations, thoughts, or feelings that we deem or think are negative. Okay. But actually what we've seen repeatedly, and what so many studies show now, is avoiding our experiences is actually the most toxic process in psychology. It's the most toxic thing for us human beings, to try to not have certain experiences. So, imagine if there was, just imagine if there was any experiences that we could get rid of. What would we get rid of? And there are so many, We would probably all say, yeah, I'd get rid of anxiety. I'd get rid of, shame. I'd get rid of embarrassment. But in a world where we know that the research has shown us nobody can successfully get rid of these things. So then, what are we all doing? What are the strategies that we're doing to try to distract away? And of course, we all have different strategies, some of them much more toxic than others. So for some people, it becomes a strategy that becomes so maladaptive that they end up in, having to have treatment. An over-applied strategy that's not working. And common types of strategies of control. So what we would think is, what we try to do to get around this idea that there's certain experiences we shouldn't have, is we try to control them. And that's the avoidant piece. And there are many strategies that we can have to try to control our internal world. Even if we think of something like anxiety, if anxiety shows up, we can avoid going to situations in which anxiety might occur. We could tell ourselves, for example, if an interview came up for a job we really want, but that was bringing up anxiety, we could tell ourselves we never really wanted it. So we could talk ourselves out of it. We can take substances. We can take medication. We can do, many, many things to avoid. We can procrastinate on Facebook. We can, seek reassurance obsessively from our friends. We can do many things, and we all engage in many strategies to avoid our experiences. And of course, any of these behaviors in and of themselves are fine. It's absolutely fine to talk to my friends, to go on Facebook, etc. What's not fine is if I'm doing it in the service of getting rid of an internal event. If I'm only doing it because I'm trying to not feel something, that's when it's a problem. Okay, here's an example of what this sort of cycle can look like. Okay, so Joseph fears rejection. So he feels overly anxious in social situations. He doesn't want to feel these feelings of anxiety. So he avoids socializing whenever possible. He doesn't accept invitations to parties. He doesn't pursue friendships. He lives alone and stays at home every night. Okay. So this means on the rare occasion when he does socialize, he's more anxious than ever and out of practice. So what happens is we end up with the very thing that we fear. This avoidance actually not only controls our internal world, it starts to control our external world as well. So a good example of this, before I go into functional contextualism, is it's like as if I hooked you up to a polygraph machine and said, this polygraph machine can tell me exactly how much anxiety you're feeling, like exactly to a T. But I don't want you to feel anxiety. I can tell if you are, though. And I'm going to make it a little bit harder. I'm going to smack you over the head if you feel any anxiety. Okay. What's going to happen is there's going to be anxiety. Because we can't choose how to feel. But what we can choose is how we behave in the outward. And, if I said, I'll smack you over the head if you don't hoover the carpet. Hoover the carpet, right? We can control our outward behavior. But the internal world, I don't get to choose when different feelings are going to pop up. Well, we have our very own polygraph hooked up to us because our nervous system tells us exactly when we're feeling anything. So if we tell ourselves that feeling anxiety is a problem and something to be frightened of, we're going to immediately know as soon as we start experiencing it. And so that's going to become something to be feared. Okay. So this approach is based on, this approach has come from behavioral science. And it's based on a philosophy that's called functional contextualism, which sounds like a big mouthful. But we'll sort of break that down a little bit. We want to take a functional approach to human behavior when it's maladaptive. So like I said with that diagnostical statistical manual, when we start to look at lists of symptoms, that's not the full picture. If we want to predict and influence, we need to know what the function of behavior is. So like in this example here, the same behavior can have many different functions. So I can drink a cup of tea because I'm thirsty, to relax, to please the hostess. I can do what will look like the exact same behavior if you described it, can have many different functions. Knowing the function tells me a lot about what's maintaining the behavior. And if we look at a more specific example, if a parent comes to me and their child is engaging in a dangerous behavior, so they're banging their head against the wall, that's dangerous. If I could describe that behavior perfectly and exactly the magnitude that they were hitting their head off the wall, that would not tell me how to intervene. Description alone is not enough for me to understand how to reduce or increase a behavior. But if I started to look at what was the function, what is the function of why the child is engaging in that behavior, this really will start to tell me something about intervention. And as a psychologist, being able to change human behavior is my job, is what I'm interested in. I don't want to describe it and not change it, right? If someone says they're suffering and something's wrong, I want to be able to help. So what we can see in that instance is there's only a few things that maintain maladaptive behavior actually, functionally. We can narrow it kind of down. One reason that maladaptive behavior can be maintained is for attention, because it gets the person attention. So sometimes the child might be banging their head off the wall because they get an awful lot of attention when they do that. If I identify that as the function, well, immediately I know what to do to intervene. I make sure that minimal attention is given around removing them so that the behavior is not maintained. Another function that could be maintaining the exact same behavior can be avoidance. Escape or avoiding a demand, like a task that they don't want to do. And another function that maintains maladaptive behavior is self-stimulatory, so it stimulates the person in some way. Okay. And when we think of it in this way, we start to see why acceptance and commitment training is so interested in this idea of avoiding experiences. Because we know that is the function, that's the function that maintains a lot of problematic behaviors. Functionally trying to avoid my experiences is going to maintain a lot of control behaviors that are not useful. I don't want to be spending my time trying to reduce an internal experience. I want to be spending my time moving towards something that matters to me. I want clients to be moving towards things that matter to them. When clients present in therapy, what they will always say in the first instance is they want to reduce an internal experience. So what they will say is, I don't want to feel this anxious, or I just do not want to feel low like this, or I want to get rid of these cravings, or these thoughts. I just I just can't climb out of these thoughts. And that's all about trying to remove an internal experience. But actually, when you look at the end of therapy, what people really care about is not removing internal experiences. What people care about is connection to others, contribution, careers that they care about, jobs that are satisfying, relationships with their family that are meaningful. It's not actually, good therapeutic outcome isn't about succeeding and never experiencing anxiety. It's about living a vital life that matters. Nobody ever wants, at the end of their life, what someone can say about them, is, oh yeah, Louise McHugh, she never experienced anxiety, but she did nothing else with her life. That's not what people want to be about. That's not what I want to be about. So when we start to look functionally at maladaptive behavior, and particularly for adults once we have language, or humans once we have language, we start to see that this thing that we do, trying to dislocate ourselves from our present and our feelings, is really dangerous. And with function, and the reason the philosophy of science is called functional contextualism, is because I cannot know the function of behavior until I understand the context in which the behavior occurs. So if the person said, drink this cup of tea or I'll electrocute you, well then the function is certainly not to relax. Okay? So the context can tell me what the function is. And the context is a situation in which the behavior occurs. Okay. And when I talk about behavior here, I don't just mean outward. Behavior is anything that a person does in this situation. So thinking, talking, remembering, daydreaming, that's all to behavior. So the functional contextualist is interesting then in identifying what's the function of a behavior that occurs. They're not interested anymore in just description. The details of the description aren't half as useful or interesting as knowing why. What is this behavior in the service of? And what that's doing is we're trying to move away from, or we're trying to move towards, should we say, looking at behavior in a non-judgmental way. Not just looking at behavior in terms of the descriptions and evaluations we might make about it. So for example, if we saw a mom in a supermarket with a child, and the child was having a tantrum and shouting, I hate you, you're the worst mom ever. We could, if we were just thinking judgmentally or describing it, think that was rude or the mom was unskilled. But if we're looking functionally at this, what we might see is actually these tantrums are maintained by getting attention. So what the mother in fact is doing functionally is putting these into what we might call extinction, which is not giving the consequence, the function, the consequence for the function that's desired. Okay. And as I said, really when we start to look at maladaptive behavior, there's only so many functions that it can be. So we can start to, so as a functional approach, in the case when it's really examples of, children with autism who are lower functioning, we might be looking at outward, escape, avoidance, attention. Once we start to become really verbal and language comes into the mix, once my language skills are good, a lot of what we see that's maintaining maladaptive behavior starts to become about this trying to avoid certain negative internal feelings or thoughts. A big one can be uncertainty. Uncertainty is in a feeling we do not like. We humans in general do not like uncertainty at all. And learning to sit with it is extremely difficult. But the the point that's interesting with that is it is an uncertain world. So it's there anyway. Just like when the client with anxiety comes in and says, I just do not want to feel this anxiety. It's there. That is there. That feeling is there. And as a psychotherapist, what you know in that moment is, if you're saying you don't want it, you're having more of it than you would have if you took a new approach to it. And the new approach isn't about these distraction techniques to get rid of it. The new approach is about learning to allow our internal experiences, but learning to allow them in a way that is about expanding and allowing, not struggling and resisting. So what we know is that it's actually the resistance to our internal experiences that creates the problem, not the experiences themselves. It's the behavior that we engage in response to the internal experiences that causes the problems, not the internal experiences themselves. So what we would say is our attempts to control them is what gets us into sticky water. So my thoughts or my feelings in their raw form are actually not threatening. If I have the feeling of anxiety, that in itself won't damage me. That's an internal experience that I'm having. If I interpret it as dangerous or threatening, if I start to fear having it, then it will become very toxic for me. And then I'll be at a point where it'll start to control my behavior. What we see is that the more I try to control my internal world, the more narrow my external world becomes. If I really have to try to be able to control my internal world, my thoughts and feelings, there's actually going to be things that I can't do in the outer world in order to successfully control them. I'm not going to want to go into situations where anxiety is going to show up, for a start. The way I respond in my connection to others will be greatly impacted on the fact that I don't want to feel certain things. So the acceptance and commitment therapy model has, in this approach, has got 6 core processes that, when a client comes into therapy, have been empirically validated. So the client will go through these 6 processes in order to be able to recontact their experiences and move in a direction that they value. And the first of these is connection, and about being here and now. So this is akin to the sort of mindfulness. Mindfulness is something you may have heard of. And this is this idea of coming back and being able to just come into the present moment here and now. This idea of dropping into my current experience, noticing my thoughts and feeling as it is here and now. A huge part of this model is about clarifying what I value, what matters to me as my direction, rather than now, what has been, trying to control my internal events or thoughts or feelings. So if I'm not being guided by not feeling certain things or not thinking certain things, what I want to be guided by is what values or what matters to me. They give me a direction. And values aren't things that can be ticked off a list, because that would be just a goal. A value is something, a way I can be in the ongoing sense. So in the ongoing sense, I can be a connected and honest partner. That is a pattern of behavior I can choose, and every day I can choose towards that behavior. Rather than getting married, which is one tick, I can do that in line with that value. That's one goal. But once I am it, I can still always come back to my value of being a connected and honest partner, if that's what I value. We use Also, behavioral activation to help clients be able to commit towards direction of behavior, commit towards behavior that is adaptive for them, in line with their chosen values. A big part of the model looks at developing a self-awareness that is a healthy self-awareness. So rather than the self we tend to, and that self that gets activated when we're sort of off task, is a self that's about evaluations and descriptions. So we tend to evaluate and describe ourselves all the time. And you'll notice, when you go out and in your next conversation, how much we sort of talk about I think, I feel, I wish, I want. We're selfing all the time. And that's fine. But in this model, we also want to develop a sense of self that the clients can have, where there can be a context of their experience, but they don't have to be any one evaluation they make about themselves. So they can have a thought that I'm not smart enough or I'm not good enough, but that's not who they are. That's an evaluation that they can notice from their context of being their experience. Watching your thinking is a huge part of the ACT model, and this is the piece that's trying to help the clients with language. When we stop and we actually start to watch our thought flow, which is something that's commonly done in therapy, we'll notice that our minds are so busy. They're just active all the time. They're just we are constantly thinking about something. What I'm going to have for lunch, what I did yesterday, that embarrassing thing I said. There's just constant thoughts going on. And that's fine. They're there. But the problem is they suck us in sometimes when we believe them as true. What the ACT model wants to do is to help people to see that their thoughts are not true. You don't have to believe your thoughts as true. Thoughts are actually fluctuating and very context dependent. If a pink elephant walked in here now, my thoughts would be different than they are when it's not here. The context changes the thoughts that show up for me. I'm tired at night, I probably evaluate myself more negatively than when I'm not. And what we've seen is that when people really believe the self-evaluations that they make as true, that's linked to much less well-being. So what we want to develop with this model is people to be able to see that, if I'm having the thought that I'm not smart enough, that's a thought that I'm having in this context. Not I am that. So just moving away from or getting that comprehensive distance to see the thoughts as just thoughts. And expansion and opening up is this acceptance piece, which is relearning to just allow feelings, which is something that we've all tended away from. Negative feelings is something that we as humans have come up with lots of strategies to not have. So just relearning how to just be with our feelings as the physical sensations that they are, our feelings as the bodily sensations that they are, while not getting entangled in the thoughts that come up with a feeling. Because if a feeling shows up like anxiety, thoughts will come in line with the feeling. So, anxiety might show up for me, and then I'll start to produce a story around why it is I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. And I'll start to believe the story that I give myself around why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. And that's getting tangled. In that moment when I do that, I'm tangled. I'm caught, and I'm stuck. I'm being about somehow trying to then talk myself out of these thoughts, trying to change these feelings. And when I'm giving my cognitive energy to that, I'm being taken away from walking in line with what matters to me and what I value. So what the ACT model wants to promote is what's called psychological flexibility. So when we're when we're trying to control our internal events, our outward behavior becomes rigid and narrow. We're all about in here. We're not getting to choose to do what we want to do. What this model and what these processes want to do is open us up to be more flexible, to have lots of choices of behavioral outward responses. So anxiety's here, and I still get to choose to go for that interview. Anxiety's here, and I still get to choose what I do. My emotions are not reasons for my behavior, even though it might feel like they are. And that's a big piece in here. You know, we've come to learn that the reasons that we give, you know, we have to give reasons for our behavior. I can't go to a staff meeting and not say there's a reason why I'm late. That's just not going to wash with the head of department. But we know that my reason could be true or not true, right? But we tend to believe the reasons we give for our behavior, like as if they caused our behavior. But imagine I said, would you mind? Something very easy. Would you prefer water or Diet Coke?
Water.
You'd have water. Can you give me a reason why you would prefer water? Healthier? Hard to say. You like it more. And, okay, and can you give me a reason that's not true to choose water? Just a lie. Yeah.
I don't like the color.
I don't like the color. I don't like the color of that. And can you give me a reason to choose Coke even though you would prefer water?
Yes, maybe it's in the social situation, everybody is drinking Coke, so maybe
maybe. Cool. So there's reasons, right? We've got true and not true reasons here. We've got a reason to choose this one. And with all of those reasons, can you, even though you would prefer water, could you, if there was Coke here, pick Coke? Yeah. So when we think our reasons caused our behavior, what's happening is we're sort of missing a piece. With reasons we behave, but our reasons do not cause the behavior. And that becomes really important when our behavior is maladaptive, because we can have things like, I didn't go to that lecture because I was too anxious. Or I didn't get out of bed because I felt depressed. And we see those reasons as perfectly reasonable. If someone said that to us, we'd be like, oh, right, okay. Yeah, okay. But the point is, actually, anyone who, in those situations, anytime a client says those things to me, they will have instances when they did feel low and got out of bed. Because the feeling doesn't cause it. It's with the feelings that we can choose. And absolutely, we might choose to stay in bed with those feelings. But when we mistake the reasons as causes, that becomes a big problem for us. And causality is just a really tricky thing. You know, if a child comes in and knocks a cup off the table, the mom might attribute cause to the carpenter who made the faulty table, you know, wobbly table. She might attribute the cause to the fact that the kid was being hyper and running around the room. Or she might attribute the cause to the fact that she shouldn't have left her cup so close to the edge of the table. Where she attributes cause, though, is going to completely dictate how she responds to that situation. You know, whether she feels guilty, whether the kid's in trouble, whether she returns the table. You know, where we attribute cause actually really changes or shapes exactly what we do next in any given situation. And that piece is sort of a link in both, but is stuck in this example of watching your thinking. Our thoughts can be seem so alluring and true, and our reasons so convincing. And with the ACT model, what we want to do is actually just get enough comprehensive distance from our thoughts and reasons that we give and our stories to be able to see, actually, I don't have to believe any of these thoughts. What matters to me in this situation? I don't have to hide from my feeling. What matters to me, really matters to me in this situation. So one simple way to summarize sort of the way the model can be looked at is, at any given time when I'm choosing to behave, there is a move that's away and a move that's towards. And if we look at it in this way, the move that's away is being about not feeling or not thinking a certain thing. The move that's towards is about going towards my value and what matters to me in this situation. At any given point, when I look at my behavior, like I'm going to not go for that interview, well, when I make this choice, is this because I do not value getting that job? Or is this because I don't want to feel the anxiety I would feel? And then, when I look at it in this way, I can still choose, but at least I can choose knowing what I'm really being about and what my behavior is being about. In that moment, it's much harder when I can really see I value this to walk in that direction, you know? So then the reason that I'm not behaving in this way because I'm feeling anxious has less credibility and weight, because there's this thing that matters to me here that I'm not going towards. Okay. So I've sort of come to the end of my time, but we have time for questions as a group now.
Sorry, I think I may have missed a large part of the talk, but what I caught was very, very beneficial.
Oh, thank you.
I just wanted to touch upon the last part when you're talking about feelings and how often we identify with our feelings and we're not able to see how we're generating them based on underlying narratives. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with someone called Byron Katie and a lot of the sort of, it's sort of like a self-help inquiry process.
Okay.
That it's just about asking yourself, is this true? And who would I be without this thought? So you give yourself the opportunity to experience an alternative narrative.
Yeah.
And how you feel, giving yourself that opportunity to actually feel an alternative narrative, to see that you're actually subject to your own stories. How could that be affected in a very practical way, you know?
Yeah, that, I mean, brilliant. Like any techniques that do that, techniques that get us to take perspective on our experience, which is exactly what that is doing. Not that I've heard of that technique before, is brilliant. You know, it's brilliant because when we take perspective, we start to see our feelings and our thoughts for what they are, experiences. And I think, yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm right here. I've been thinking lately a lot about, sort of a little bit about detachment from my own emotions. But I work in special needs, and I work with with ESL children, but there are some of my children, the children I work with are autistic, okay? And I could see this being very applicable for the families, because very often what happens is autistic children struggle with hypersensitivity, they struggle with not understanding other people's emotions, and their reactions seem very unsensitive or maybe very rigid. And what happens is that the caretakers are caught in a paradigm and will misunderstand the challenges that children with autism will experience, and this doesn't help and open up the communication, because, you know, one emotion triggers another emotion.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's where we can spiral down. But in terms of autism, how would this be applicable for children with high needs, because they find it extremely difficult to expand? Now, in my practice, what I do is I sort of, what I try to record their behavior and show it to them and try to open up a dialogue with an autistic child. So if I have a child on a behavioral plan, I will take pictures of their behavior and take pictures of their behavior when they're calmer and when they're better, and try to show them, you know, in this case your teacher's reacting well, in this case your teacher's not reacting well. And that's pretty much, you know, with children with high needs, that's about as much as I can communicate or try to foster self-awareness.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult for them.
Absolutely. So actually that's, so one of my core research areas is perspective taking. And so with children with autism, like before any of that, the basic language units to be able to take the perspective of another need to be put into place. So a lot of training before ever they could, this is not about, someone with those needs is not in this point yet. It's a lot of training in, if I was you, if you were me. Lots of feedback and training and trials of that. Now, assuming, obviously, they have some basic language skills in place. I've got water, you're sitting on a chair, if I was you and you were me. Or if I was you. And then loads and loads of feedback across trials. What they need to get is I as distinct to you, here as distinct to there, and now as distinct to then. So like spatial, temporal, and interpersonal. We have an app, there are some trials that I can show to you that of exactly what we try to do to build that up first. Sort of building them up to the point where they've got language, where they'll then need to not avoid their experiences like their language is telling them to, in a sense.
Hello, thank you so much. It's so wonderful, this concept and the way you describe it. My question for you is that have you had experience using ACT with problems of kind of compulsive behavior? And if so, can you give an example, please, of how that might work?
Yeah. So in my work, it's with parents, with patients with chronic pain, adolescents, and many things. So compulsions per se isn't stuff that I have done stuff with, but they have done work with obsessive compulsive disorder, and it's really good for that group. And I would say, theoretically, it makes sense that that would be really good for that group because there's such a control agenda, around the thoughts and around the feelings and around trying to promote certainty in the world. That's what those rituals or compulsions are about. So it does work. The research has been done, and Mike Tuig is a researcher who does a lot with that group, and he works in the States on that. And theoretically, absolutely, I can see how it absolutely applies to that group. Broadening the response options to a situation. Not just hand washing or not just.
Similarly, a great presentation. Thank you. Oh. Thank you very much. Very clear, very, very lovely. I'm interested in the comparisons between ACT and mindfulness. Yeah. And I think clearly ACT places more of a focus on values, on sort of behavioural activation, on sort of behavioural techniques. Absolutely. And I'm just wondering what you see as being the pros and cons of each for the treatment of depression, because they've both got pretty good randomised control trials suggesting that they're really quite helpful.
Big time. Like in the Lancet, Mindfulness just came out in the Lancet there last week. So mindfulness, the interest in mindfulness and acceptance and commitment therapy sort of co-evolved, because in Britain, say Teasdale and Mark Williams were coming to the conclusion that with CBT we need something else. These clients are trying to jump out of their experience, and so they drew on that sort of Eastern philosophy and mindfulness. Meanwhile, say Steve Hayes was a behavioral scientist who was noticing that, wow, language makes us completely insensitive. He was doing all these studies on rule-governed behavior, and things like he was instructing participants, he'd give half of them an instruction and saying, right, your rule is to get points, press the spacebar fast. This is in the 80s. And then he'd get other people to come in and give them no rule. And what he'd find was that the people who got the rule, of course, much quicker, because language helps us do stuff faster. We've got rules. But the people, of course, took longer when they didn't have the rule. But then when they changed the consequence, which meant when points were no longer delivered for pressing fast, the people who had originally started pressing the spacebar fast with the rule continued. They're not getting points and they're still pressing the spacebar. Because language allows us to formulate rules that means we do not contact the consequences. Whereas the people who'd learned by trial and error, immediately, when they stopped getting points, changed. Oh, not getting points. Must try, what else? So they were seeing, wow, language makes us rigid. Someone can give me a rule and I will follow it without ever seeing if it works for me. So at the same time, say the two disciplines were evolving, and so contact with the present moment, that connection be here now, was a piece that it became in the ACT model. So the two treatment approaches use, and I would say, in ACT, anything they do in mindfulness and mindfulness-based interventions. Well, I mean, anything maybe, we won't bring in everything everyone does, but MBSR and MBCT, yeah, they're about getting in contact with the experience. I would say that acceptance and commitment therapy is grounded in that philosophy of functional contextualism and has a very clear theory of language as to why thoughts are thoughts. So from my perspective, that's the piece that's very interesting to me, because a lot of research I've done on perspective taking, I kind of want to understand exactly what the processes are involved. So then if it is a child with autism who can't take perspective, I can design an intervention because I know what perspective taking is, if you know what I mean. Because it's my perspective. But I think if it's my friend who needs to go in for treatment, mindfulness would bring them in contact with their experience. So I wouldn't be concerned about them going for a mindfulness treatment. Do you know what I mean?
Hello.
Hi.
What do you think about spiritual meditation? Because, this connection, be here now, then self-awareness, it is very related to Zen Buddhist thinking. Can you explain this one?
Yeah. What was the last word, 2 words maybe?
Zen Buddhism.
Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism. Yeah, so that, because, there was that, the Eastern philosophies were the obvious connection with mindfulness. Behavioral science, the direction that I would have come from was about looking at language and how it disconnects us from the present. And I think that I like to sort of distance myself from any connection to any religion, because I don't mean say myself whether I'm religious. I'm not answering that. What I'm saying is, as a science of behavior, I think it's different and it's separate, and it muddies the water to connect to any particular sense. Unless you're asking me, does this help us understand why we can be spiritual? Which I do think that language is one of the reasons why we humans can, of course, understand the concept of a higher order being in ways that other species can't. Absolutely. But I think these basic human processes in terms of what language is, etc., and the fact that we want to avoid experiences, I think that's human behavior, and that's the science side that I'm coming in from, and separate from that, I would say. I think that's we humans have that in common, right? All of us have this, I would say.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Louise McHugh one more time, and please join us outside for a reception. Thank you.